Well, thank you, everyone. So, obviously, the topic of this whole session is digital, and digital keeps referring to the word data, and people keep talking about data as if it's something that we all understand and we all agree on. But as you all probably know, data is probably the most obscure of assets, but it's also one of the biggest barriers. So, what I wanted to talk today about is data down in the weeds. Now, to clarify, I'm in the capital markets. We're looking for finance, insurance, and surety. So the data we're looking for is not the granular data on system performance, but rather the overall. If the system is supposed to do 1,000 watts a month, if it's doing 900, I know I got a problem. If it's doing 1,200, I know I don't have a problem. But getting the system information, getting the information is rapidly evolving now. So what I wanted to talk about is, why? So the basic overview here is that there is a change going on, and most of you people are in the digital world. You've probably seen this before. It's called the adoption curve, where there is, a certain reluctance to do anything, and then all of a sudden there's this chasm where everybody sort of stops, and then it just takes off. So I believe where we are right now, and I'm going to get into the why here in just a bit, is that we are right at the beginning, as everybody's been mentioning, of this cataclysm of AI and demand. The smart cities, the smart contract, all of this is all coming together now, and people are starting to really buy in. So in the adoption curve, we are at the backside of the chasm, and I think we're really going to be taking off. The other thing you've probably heard of is the hockey stick. So you heard from Al Berkeley yesterday. He wrote in 2002 the case for XBRL, which is a financial reporting standard for governments. And it is for publicly traded companies to report to the SEC. Of the 3,500 utilities, 3,000 of them are publicly traded, which means these utilities are already in XBRL. And so what has happened here just recently with the IRA, IHJ, Financial Transparency Act, is that all of that foundational work is now starting to materialize and mature, and you're going to start to see the advancement of data interoperability skyrocket like you've never seen it before. So let's back up a little bit and talk about smart terminologies. We're hearing all sorts of terms out here. The reality is where we have been is a dumb reality. Siloed data, separated by industries, separated by market segments, that has not been able to cross over. Where we're looking for tomorrow, and tomorrow's objective is to break the silo approach and have data be able to be exportable and transferable and exchangeable, multi-industry, multi-location, multi-country. Because when we have that kind of data interoperability, that's when you will see the entrepreneurs and the innovators really go crazy, and they will build and innovate new mousetraps for safety, for energy, for any number of things, unleashed by the fact that the data is no longer the barrier. So when we talk about smarts, right? Smart meter turns the individual consumer data into a digital format. That then supports a smart grid. A smart contract would be an individual contract on a construction project. A smart project is a group of contracts that are all smart. And then, of course, a smart infrastructure is a group of projects that are all connecting. And ultimately, you get to a smart city where it can literally translate across the entire spectrum of society. All of them require the same thing. In order to efficiently operate, they have to be using the same system, the same data system, to where the data elements are consistent across the board. And that's what puts the smart in smart. So when we talk about how do we get here, let's talk about the historical. The hockey stick, we've been on this for a long, long time. There's a lot of homework that's already been done. I gave the first presentation on its impact in surety bonds. I write guarantees on contracts in 2000. That's 23 years ago. Al Berkeley wrote a paper on the case for XBRL in 2002. So the case and the deliberations and the committee meetings that have gone into where we are now have been going on for a long, long time. This is not a new topic. It's been well done. We have a unique approach in our group. I call it a collaboration approach. I'm sure many of you have seen DOE, FOAs, funding opportunity announcements. Well, we use those funding opportunity announcements to synergize the group around common goals. The common goal that we all seek is a common data environment. So we will respond to FOAs, whether or not we're an Indian tribe or whether or not we're this or that, because each one of our responses to the DOE is a collaboration of multi-industries, multi-trade associations, all coming around a very singular idea. We need to have consistent data. So the first one we did was 2014, a decade ago. The last one we did with another consortium group, and it entailed a lot of the content you're going to see today. So the DOE is very familiar with what we're doing. As a matter of fact, we did win some of the FOAs, and I'll get into that. It's called the orange button. But backing up again, the foundation is really done by mandate. In 2014, they passed the Data Act, which basically put a roadmap for federal agencies to all get onto a single data standard, a machine-readable data standard. And of course, one of the most recognized one is called XBRL. That is Extended Business Reporting Language. And what that is now when publicly traded companies submit their financial statements to the SEC, the data elements are consistent, whether or not you're a hotel, a railroad, doesn't matter. Everybody is using the same dictionary now in reporting to the SEC. So to simplify it, think about if I sent you my address card in my email, and you received my email and you cut and pasted my name and address into your Outlook or Lotus Notes, or you could do a download. Which one is safer? Which one is more accurate? Which one is faster? Obviously the download. So the SEC, basically with the Data Act, did the same thing and said, hey, Mr. Publicly Traded Company, instead of you sending it in Excel, you in Word, and you in pink, and you in blue, where we have to cut it and paste it into Edgar, we want to be able just to download it. So the XBRL effort created data uniqueness for every data element in every publicly traded company so that they could submit to the federal government. Well, we're in the capital markets. We receive financial statements as well. And believe it or not, most of our capital markets are still cutting and pasting the financial statements we receive. And the more XBRL gets implemented and adopted by mandate in the public sector, but the private sector will start to ask for private companies, hey, when you send me your financial statement, send it to me in XBRL because I can then just import it, save myself hours and hours of time, and have better information, better accuracy, all of that. So that foundation was the Data Act. The resulting in the government with branding was three different buttons we'll talk about. The blue button, standardized medical data. It's under the Veterans Administration. The green button, you'll recognize as your smart meter. That was basically creating the data set for energy consumption, which relatively is pretty easy. You have 3,500 utilities and you have one data set. So no matter what utility you went to and you retrieved the green button data, the data elements were consistent, the format was consistent, and what that means is that your software programmers can now develop software to analyze the data, where it couldn't before because 3,500 utilities didn't, gave out different information. Now it's all consistent. So when the orange button came out, that is the data sets for energy production. Now, energy production is different because they are your thousands to thousands. The energy production is not just the contractor, it's the permitting, it's the acquisition, it's the building, it's the financing, insurance, surety. There's a stakeholder group that is huge. So the orange button is thousands to thousands of data elements. Now, one of the things I should share is you're all going to get a copy of this presentation, and you'll notice as I go through it, there's a lot of text here. I'm not reading the texts. What I did with the text is to make it available to you as a resource. And you'll notice that about every page has the links so that you can, when you pull down this PDF, you can follow up and get the links and go see the legislation, go see what I'm talking about. You can dig into the weeds as much as you want. So one of the elements that I've been involved in is the orange button, and it created a series of applications to now create data sets. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but the orange button is this huge collaboration of almost 400 companies, utilities, regulators, and all the rest coming around. What are the most important data elements we need to exchange? With that, we bring in other federal agencies. One of the big issues, and you saw it earlier today, they talk about energy equity. We need to be able to get small businesses to be able to participate in what we're doing. And we put out financing programs. We want to be able to have individuals that have generally been marginalized in the past to be able to get financing, to be able to participate. So the SBA has joined, and now when I do a financial submission to my insurance carrier, I can do the same submission digitally to the SBA, and they can turn it around instantly. Another example of the SBA is, if you're familiar with construction, you have to report your work in progress. The SBA now has created the XBRL standard, so you can literally submit your data to the SBA for instant import and analysis, and obviously creating efficiency in dealing with federal agencies. Speaking of federal agencies, the FERC is now requiring XBRL from its utilities. So you can imagine, if you want efficiency, the utility that is submitting data to the FERC, generally about system performance, keeping it simple, well, if the contractors that they're hiring are submitting the data in the same format as they're reporting to FERC, the data reliability is significantly improved, as well as its credibility. So the idea of having data elements go down the circle depends on how many people want it, and if they ask for it, that there's a demand for it. So FERC is requiring it now from utilities, and we hope that that will spur the utilities to require it of its contractors so that it can offer FERC and itself that consistent data. Recently, one of the reasons the hockey stick is going to go in 2023, they passed the Financial Transparency Act, which is now mandating the implementation of data standards in all federal agencies, starting with a select group, but it's expanding throughout the government. So if you have any contracts with the government, you're going to find them asking you for the information in XBRL to be more efficient on their side. The Investment Act that just passed actually has a specific language that it's looking for accelerated implementation and deployment of advanced digital construction management systems. They actually set aside $100 million of grant funds so that anybody who's working in this environment and recognize that they have to get to a digital environment to be able to communicate, the government is giving grants out to help you transform and to cover that transition. But it also means that it's going to be used everywhere. An example, in California, Caltrans publishes every progress payment on the web. You can imagine now I can write a bond on a project that Caltrans is running, and in real time, I mean, it's monthly progress payments, I can determine the progress of that job. More importantly, I can be advised earlier if that job is running into performance issues. I'm writing performance guarantees on this contract. Knowing how it's performing changes my ability to do a better job. It provides me the opportunity to do data analytics on a project basis, but as you can imagine, Caltrans does $10 billion worth of work. It also enables portfolio management. We've now passed a law that every public agency in California has to publish its information on the internet so that it's available the same way Caltrans does. Another example is Virginia Department of Transportation. What was interesting about when they converted their DOT to providing data on system performance or construction performance, there's a great article when it first came out. It was when .NET came out, and enough people in this room are probably technically proficient to remember when .NET came out. They were quite excited because now within their system, they can create a dashboard of information. So the law of unintended consequences, a couple of the IT guys put up the progress information on their jobs as a dashboard. What they thought was kind of a cool thing had a most unusual effect. All of a sudden, the contractors who were behind schedule, all of a sudden were basically shown to be behind schedule. And they started to notice all their contractors started to perform better. The transparency actually created an influencing factor in the way people performed, but it also, in California's deal, all the subcontracts and supply chain had full transparency on what was paid, what the job's progress was, and everybody who has made information available to stakeholders has found a gain in efficiency. The trouble is, of course, getting people to do anything. So what we did, this is 15 years ago, with some students at California State Chico, we created a dashboard that tracked $10 billion worth of contracts over 4,000 projects on 2 different DOTs and had a single dashboard. And it could track the likelihood of default by very simple metrics. If the job was behind schedule and if it had stop notices and liens. And the higher up the default meter was how far behind schedule they were and how many stop notices they had, giving the surety industry for the first time actually ability to track its exposure and actually start to do predictive analytics on its construction activity. So let's move on next slide. So now we know where we've come from. There's been a lot of homework done to get us here. A lot of experiments, a lot of trials. Now let's talk about the future foundation. There's 3 things that are going on right now, and we were talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's really a global approach to attack climate change in all sorts of factors. The recent one that has just come out is the Inter-American Development Bank, which is similar to the World Bank, the IMF, for the Western Hemisphere, has come up with a set of policy recommendations that move the ball forward in developing infrastructure for the Western Hemisphere. And then lastly, and the purpose of my talk, is COP28, which is the convening of parties. It's part of the Climate Paris Agreement, where every year we come together as a nation, as a society, and determine where we've been and where we need to go to stay on track. This year it's in Dubai, and we have been invited to go to Dubai and describe what we are talking about here today, the international digital ecosystem architecture. So looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, we actually touch 9 of the 17 directly because it is all about infrastructure, it's all about water, energy, clean energy, and all the rest. So anybody who's interested in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, data interoperability and data exchange will have a key role in it. Again, for the Western Hemisphere, these are the companies and policies. Recommendation number 14 is to increase interoperability and data sharing between all players in the financial market. That's exactly what XBRL and the International Financial Reporting, which is, they are mapped together, that actually provides it. So if you notice, the topic of my talk here is increasing interoperability and data among financial markets. We are actually answering recommendation 14. We've been invited back to Washington, D.C. to give a presentation to the Inter-American Development Bank, where we can describe how we can answer recommendation 14. COP28, they're basically saying, hey, come on, guys, we've got to get together. We've got to make something happen. But what he's basically saying is, for COP28, they're not going to talk about the why anymore. We all know the why. Their big focus is on the how. And they understand that the how has to be a unifying ecosystem. So what COP28, long ago when they stated its goals, they're looking for that. So now let's focus, what is the how? How are we going to achieve this data interoperability? How could we talk about the data exchange and all these system providers that you're hearing and talking about and all the rest, when they're talking about data, then, well, that's all fine, but how is data going to move? And again, we're at the top level. So the how is really data. It's a data structure. It's a data infrastructure. And if you look at the top level, there's nothing more credible than the XBRL and the International Financial Reporting Standard. These data standards are recognized by multiple countries, by governments, by federal agencies across the globe. There is no reason to compete with this. And as far as the XBRL is concerned, it's free of patents. It's available for anybody to implement without constraint. So why would anybody compete with something that's free? But the problem with it being free also is pretty hard to sell something that's for free. And if also the data standard creates efficiencies that other people have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars creating efficiency solutions for that are no longer necessary because data can be freely exchanged, then you find obstacles. Right behind that, the XBRL taxonomy has a thing called extensions, where we get down to specific industries and specific niches. So for instance, there is extensions for solar, for fintech, for insurance. There's all sorts of specific data standards that are in the XBRL taxonomy that businesses, governments, anybody can rely on as they seek to enter into a digital ecosystem to be able to exchange data. The real challenge is that there are hundreds of data sets out there and hundreds of people putting together data, whether they're industry adopted data sets, industry adopted standards, all the way down to the private companies that have their own data elements that they're looking for. So the challenge is not to give up on all of that legacy work, but to tie it together under one universal data architecture. So the hierarchy of data is really to look at the XBRL taxonomy and say, all right, I need to be able to exchange various pieces of data. Is that data in the taxonomy? If it is, I could use it. If it's not in the taxonomy, then we have an opportunity to put it into the taxonomy. So what our current effort is right now is we are now identifying and looking for the data elements that we could incorporate into the XBRL taxonomy so that it could be broader implementation and broader adoption, and hopefully create more innovative ideas and products hitting the market. The number one thing we have to remember when we talk about data exchange is it all starts with and ends with cyber. You have to be able to have a secure system. Now, I am a business user. I am not a cyber expert, so I am not going to try to touch cyber. There's plenty of cyber experts out there that are dealing with this, and I will defer to them. So what I'm working on is the codify part, where they talked first about the green button. It was one data set from 3,500 utilities. So how do we get thousands and thousands to connect with each other? Instead of mapping each one to themselves, we simply create an XBRL set of data sets, the very common data sets like company profile, what the contract agreement, a typical agreement could be, system performance. If we create the data sets in XBRL, then anybody can exchange those data sets confident knowing that it's an apples to apples data exchange. Then what we try to do is engage. We have a number of groups. One of the groups is CURT, Construction User Roundtable Group, that's at Texas A&M now. We have Texas State here with obviously Andreas. We have the Orange Button Group with 400 different people. We have Financial Data Exchange. There's all these trade associations that are all focused on the same thing, transitioning our economy to a digital economy. And so if we engage with them in the effort to create the data standards, then those data standards can be replicated and be implemented by any one of those trade associates, any one of them. Nobody has to give up a legacy system. All they have to do is map their legacy system to this industry standardized, industry adopted, federally recognized, internationally recognized data set. And that means their legacy system is now capable of plugging in to an international supply chain. We have a couple of pilot projects out there, what we're doing for community resiliency, where we're creating a microgrid that has government financing, private intersection, all developing the data interoperability that enables a digital ecosystem. We're actually submitted the grant to the DOE. They came back and said the grants really have to go to individual recipients, not a group of collective of trade associations and all the rest. However, our socializing with the DOE affords us the opportunity to not only stay engaged with them, they did put up $6 million for the Orange Button, but to keep them engaged. And even though we may not win an FOA, what we do win is the collaboration and the partnership we have with the people all striving to create a common data element. So let's go into the how again, data elements and the data sets. So the way a project generally runs is you start off with the permitting and whatnot, and you create certain data elements to that. As it goes into construction, you start to develop agreements and whatnot. As it comes to the surety market, we write surety bonds, insurance products. Ultimately, you have a finished project, and then that finished project will start to produce reports on how it's performing. This data stack literally goes with the project and is complete data on how that project was put together. So if you were to look at that data stack, it doesn't matter what kind of job you have. So this is a shout out to my friend Key here. You'll notice the first one I have is a river turbine. The fact of the matter is we don't care how the energy is produced. If we're going to write a guarantee on energy being produced, we want to know, is it succeeding? Is it supposed to do 1,000 watts? And is it? So that 1,000 watts can come from water, it could come from biomass, it could come from anything. The idea is to break the silos. This is not an industry-specific data set. It's anything you want to build. We should be able to have innovators come up with anything they want and know that they can plug into any utility, get financing from any bank, get insurance from any insurance company. No monopoly on information, no monopoly on how this system would work. It's available to everyone. So me, that's my little data set with surety bond. So if you look at a surety bond under a digital form, you'll see on the left-hand side, what used to be a 2-page document is now a 9-page document. The first set of pages on this paper form are all the data elements that are involved in this project. Now, the right-hand side, you can see that's the data. It's really just mapped. So instead of having a form fill, this is consensus docs, you have a reference. So the data, when we exchange a surety bond now, could have 45, 50 data elements, and then here's the text. The text doesn't need to be exchanged. If you're using AIA, consensus docs, federal forms, we know what the text is. All we want to exchange is the data. And then just like the address, the recipient can import the data. So my single little surety bond data set, you could email it to your insurance broker, to your company. I mean, it's low-end data interoperability. You'll see in the future, innovations will come up with API and data exchanges and all sorts of triggers and mechanisms. But it really is, down to the simplest level, a common acceptance of data sets that can be exchanged between parties, that their software can accurately and correctly import the data for their purposes, whatever it may be. So when you look at a project lifecycle, you start off, the job's got just that initial set from the initial permitting. But when you go into construction, that first month of construction, you have a monthly progress report. So if I've written the bond on that contractor on this job, I now have the first monthly progress report, so I can see he's performing as I have guaranteed. But as the project progresses, 6 months, I now have 6 months of progress reports. I may ultimately have 24 monthly progress payments. As a surety guaranteeing performance, this is where the truth is of the contract. So when you think about these data elements being put in blockchain or whatnot, they all become part of the project's data structure, and it becomes part of the project's data information. Once a project is up and running, the same thing holds true for operations. We have a monthly operating report that after 6 months, I have 6 months, and after 2 years, I'll have 2 years of operating reports. Now, where this plays an important role is you go back to, all right, I'm now changing data sets. What do I mean? What is a data set? I'm going to go back to the orange button. The orange button created a series of data sets that will enable the digital transaction to be taken on. First one is, who issues the permit? So the authority having jurisdiction. We now have a database of every AHJ in the country. There's 22,000 of them. We have now digitized each one of them to where we know who the AHJ is because we actually have their digital marker for who they are. So the first part of a permit is who's issuing it. The second part is the solar app. Now, this one is fascinating. In order to get a permit for a solar project, and you can imagine this is a pretty low end, a couple of panels and an inverter, it's not exactly complicated. But when you have 22,000 different AHJs, it is complicated. If you could make it to where there was only one data set that an AHJ could then import, then you would have tremendous gain in efficiency. So that's what we did, part of the orange button. NREL now hosts the solar app, and public agencies or AHJs can go to the federal government and receive compensation to upgrade their ability to import the data. Remember the address file? It's the same for them. Every AHJ basically has a database. Some is in Azure, some is in Oracle, whatever it may be. But what they have is name, address, and phone number. And on a permit, right? Who's doing what the components are. All the information that's relative to this project is now in this solar app. And if all 22,000 of these agencies receive this data, that consistency will allow all of them to start going to software solutions that can tap the amazing amount of information that the permit has. So think about the financial markets where I am. Right now, a solar installer has to go to the AHJ and he submits his progress, his permitting information, which is averaging 8 weeks. Under the solar app, they've gotten it down to 1 day. So you can imagine the efficiency there on the very low end, and this is solar. But what we're exploring now is, okay, let's take that solar app data set on project and drop it into blockchain. And guess what? I can now get insurance quotes on it. I can get financing for the project. I can do all sorts of things because anybody that needs to know the facts of the job, the permit probably has that data. And since it's now in a constant data, and it's an XBRL, any software out there that is working with contractors could map to the solar app at no expense, well, expense for themselves, but be able to have that data at no expense. In California, we've passed a law that every AHJ is now mandated to implement this within the next 24 months. That means every solar project in California on residential will have this same data set. So you can imagine the size of that market is going to create all sorts of opportunities for software developers to create tools that can take that permit data and provide better access to insurance, finance, surety, let alone any number of things. Then lastly, on my side, I write bonds that guarantee the supply as an example. So I'll guarantee that, company X is going to deliver, 100 panels that'll do 1,000 watts a panel, whatever it may be. Under my obligation, if the developer or if that supplier cannot meet it, I have to come up with panels. And so what we have now is a registry of every panel. And I can use this registry to say, okay, I need panels that can do 1,000 watts. Now, when I'm writing the bond and I look at how many panels are out there at 1,000 watts and I see 120 manufacturers, that's a low risk supply bond. If I look at it and it's the Xenon 5000 and nobody else can produce a panel at that level, then that's a different risk. So what I'm saying is that underwriting is now going to be able to have much more granular information, not only for the underwriting, but more importantly for the people who buy our products, whether it be insurance or surety and finances. They'll be able to understand what the claims process is, what the cure process is, because you've defined it. You've defined it with data metrics. So the product registry is huge in the ability for all of the capital markets to know exactly what is at play, what the risk is, and to be able to accommodate that risk. Now, another example of data sets is surety bond forms. People keep thinking we have to create data sets. And what we have to share with everybody is we're not having to create data sets. They're already created. AIA has data sets for all of its contracts. Every one of its contracts has data elements. The same with consensus stocks. Perhaps I should give you a little background. AIA is the American Institute of Architects. They generally represent owners and are generally lean a little bit toward the owner side as a result. To counter that, the AGC, Associated General Contractors, brought together 40 trade associations, the surety industry being one, electrical, plumbers. These 40 trade associations came up with their own set of consensus-driven documents, which is hence the term consensus docs. So when we put the data elements of each one of those, and the government obviously has their own government forms, but we look at the data elements, many of the data elements are the same. They overlap. So if we look at those 3 different entities, their data sets, and recognize that their data elements are in XBRL, then we can exchange those data sets without having to recreate the wheel. They already exist. The fact of the matter is there's data sets throughout the construction industry, throughout the insurance industry that already exist. All we have to do to create a digital ecosystem is recognize the data set we want. Is it in the taxonomy? If it's not, get the data elements in the taxonomy and you could use it. So examples also, data elements. We're talking about data sets, but how about some of the granular? As you know, we are now moving into an international supply chain. And so where the government used to look at federal tax ID as a way to identify who you are, or they started using the Dun & Bradstreet number, that really didn't work very well for where they knew we were all heading. So collectively, in a world body, we are now part of a group called the LEI, Legal Entity Identifier, allowing each company to have a specific internationally recognized 20-digit code, so that if you're going to do business, instead of you filling out an application and you have to fill out all the blank forms, you can put in your LEI and I can hit the LEI database and I can pull in your address, your company, I can do your subsidiaries, I can pull in everything. So the ability to create a digital ecosystem is really about that, to be able to go with a single data and tentacle into wherever you're going and pull that linkage and then connect that linkage. So as a portfolio, you can see how many times I've got this company, that company, subsidiaries. The LEI is huge. In the United States, they did drop the Dun & Bradstreet, and they now created the System for Award Management, or SAM. So you'll have a SAM number now if you're going to do anything in the federal government. And then lastly, in our conversations with the Department of Defense, they said, well, we have a digital element we need. It's called the cybersecurity model, because when we exchange information with our procurement partners, if we're buying, toilet paper and whatnot, they don't have to have a big cybersecurity system. But as you get up into the sophistication, into the black ops, they need to know that you have a cyber system in place in order to operate and to be able to be on those procurements. And the government has to be able to understand who they are contracting with, particularly in sensitive projects. So when you look at our bond form now, those elements are part of it. Because when I put together a customer, I know what their LEI number is. I know what their CMIC number is. I know these data. So I include them in the bond form. Now, if you were to say, I want you to fill this out, and it was all a bunch of blank, you'd say that's an overwhelming amount of information. What this does is it allows the computer system to generate it. So I'm going to hurry up here. So basically, as you look at the life cycle of a job, as it goes through design and construction adds data elements, operating creates data elements, and ultimately you have a total deal. So if you're going to sell to an owner, what generally happens is when a project moves between stakeholders, a whole bunch of data is lost. And what we're suggesting is if you keep the data intact, you're able to maintain that data all the way through, and the amount of project loss is zero. You'll be able to go all the way back to the original. And of course, this is what we talk about. If you have, as an insurance company, a bank, and you have all this wealth of information, this is where AI comes in. AI can start to look at that, analyze it, and start to recognize trends. So the digital ecosystem, I'm going to go really fast now because I know I'm running out of time. We have a digital ecosystem with us. We have a solar installer, one subcontractor, and one supplier. But when you think about it, when they add their broker and their insurance company, we now have 10 people in the digital ecosystem, all of which can now exchange information on that bond form. Every one of those stakeholders could now know everything about that job from the surety bond data set. They can enter that bond validation number, and they can receive an import of all the data. Extending out, I work with insurance agents, I work with all the rest. So that data circle extends to the third parties that I work with. And it extends further when you consider the fact that a lot of this job information is going to utilities, regulators, going to capital markets, third-party people. The digital ecosystem is not constrained. So really, if you look at it, you start off with a sort of network of the original stakeholders, and they're going to be distributing information throughout an extended layers of stakeholders. Great article. Again, this is a PDF you'll have. McKinsey did a great report. That's really what the digital ecosystem is. It's thousands of companies communicating with thousands of companies, delivering information across those networks. So when we look at what the connectivity is, it's the data sets. When we identify the data sets and they're in the taxonomy, we have a digital ecosystem. So in summary, our road to COP28 is develop the data sets and develop the data architecture that people recognize it exists, because that is the how. All right, did I do a good time? All right.